The ship screamed as it fell through the atmosphere of the frozen moon called HFY, and Dr. Alara Vance held onto her seat with white knuckles as fire consumed the windows around her. She had been traveling through a quiet sector of space when the cosmic storm hit without warning, and now her small medical transport was dying around her, systems failing one after another, like candles blown out by an angry wind. "Brace for impact," the ship's computer announced in a voice that seemed far too calm for the situation, and Alara closed her eyes and thought of Earth, of green forests and warm summers, and the faces of people she loved. The crash was violent and terrible, throwing her against her restraints with enough force to steal the breath from her lungs, and then everything went dark and silent. When Alara opened her eyes again, she found herself surrounded by twisted metal and sparking wires, and cold air was rushing in through a massive hull of her ship. She could see white snow swirling outside, and she could hear the howling of wind that sounded almost like the howling of wolves. She checked herself for injuries, and found bruises and cuts, but nothing broken, which seemed like a miracle given how badly the ship had been destroyed. Her emergency supplies had scattered across the floor, but she gathered what she could into her medical bag and prepared to face the frozen world outside. HFY was not a place where humans were welcome, and Alara knew this very well. This moon belonged to the Vorak, a species of wolf-like creatures who stood 7 feet tall and had claws that could tear through steel and teeth that could crush bone. They were apex predators, feared across the galaxy, and they hated humans with a passion that burned hotter than any star. The Vorak had declared this moon sacred ground, a place where their females came to give birth and raise their young, and any outsider who set foot here was killed without question or mercy. Alara knew that if she was found, she would die. But staying in the crashed ship meant freezing to death, so she had no choice but to venture out into the blizzard and search for shelter. She wrapped herself in every piece of warm clothing she could find and stepped out into the white wilderness. The cold hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath and making her eyes water. The wind was so strong that she had to lean into it just to walk, and the snow was so thick that she could barely see 10 feet in front of her face. She stumbled forward, one step at a time, praying that she would find somewhere to hide before the cold killed her, or the Vorak found her. She walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, and her body was beginning to fail her. Her fingers were numb, her face was burning with cold, and her legs were shaking so badly that each step felt like climbing a mountain. She was about to collapse when she saw it through the swirling snow. A dark opening in the side of the rocky hill. A cave. Alara used the last of her strength to reach the cave entrance, and she stumbled inside and fell to her knees on the stone floor. The wind could not reach her here, and the temperature was warmer. Not warm, but warmer, and she felt tears of relief freeze on her cheeks. She pulled out a small heating device from her bag and activated it, and gentle warmth began to spread through the cave. She sat there for a moment, just breathing, just being grateful to be alive. And then she heard it, a small sound, a whimper, coming from deeper inside the cave. Alara froze, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. She was not alone in this cave, and whatever was in here with her might be very dangerous. She reached for the small light attached to her jacket and turned it on, pointing the beam into the darkness. What she saw made her gasp. There were 2 shapes in the back of the cave. One was large and still, covered in silver fur that was matted with dried blood, and Alara could tell immediately that this creature was dead. It was a female Vorak, and her body had been torn apart by something with claws and teeth. Probably the ice crawlers that lived in the caves of this moon. But the second shape was small and moving, and when the light touched it, 2 massive amber eyes looked up at Alara with an expression of pure fear and pain. It was a cub, A Vorak cub, no bigger than a large dog. Its silver fur was stained with blood, both its mother's and its own, and Alara could see that it was badly injured. One of its front legs was bent at a terrible angle, clearly broken, and there were deep wounds across its small body. The cub tried to growl at her, tried to be brave and fierce like its kind was supposed to be. But the sound that came out was weak and pitiful, and then it collapsed back onto the cold stone floor, too weak to even lift its head. Alara's training as a doctor took over before her fear could stop her. She moved toward the cub slowly, carefully, making soft sounds to show that she meant no harm. The cub watched her with those huge amber eyes, too exhausted to fight or flee. She knelt beside it and began to examine its injuries, and what she found made her heart sink. The broken leg was bad, but the internal injuries were worse. She could see from the way the cub was breathing that there was bleeding inside its small body, and she could feel that its temperature was dropping dangerously low. This cub was dying, and there was very little she could do about it with her limited supplies. But she had to try. She had to do something, because she could not just sit here and watch a child die, even if that child belonged to a species that would kill her on sight. She opened her medical bag and began to work, cleaning wounds and applying bandages and injecting medicine that she hoped would help. The cub whimpered, but did not fight her, perhaps understanding somehow that she was trying to help. As she worked, she heard something in the distance, howling, the deep and terrifying howling of the Vorak pack. They were searching the area, probably looking for the missing mother and cub, and they were getting closer. Alara's hands began to shake, and it was not from the cold. She knew what would happen when they found her here, in their sacred nursery grounds, beside the body of their dead. They would tear her apart without a moment of hesitation. She should run. She should leave now while she still had a chance to hide. But the cub made another small sound of pain, and those amber eyes found hers again, and she saw something in them that she recognized. Loneliness, fear, the desperate need to not be alone. The howling grew louder, closer, and Alara made her choice. She would stay with this dying child until the end, whatever that end might be. She would not let it die alone in the cold and the dark. She bent back over the cub and continued her work, her hands steady now, her fear pushed aside by something stronger. Compassion. The thing that made humans human. The howls were very close now, and she could hear the sound of large bodies moving through the snow outside the cave. The howling stopped, and in the sudden silence, Alara could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears like a drum. The Vorak were just outside the cave now, and she could smell them. A wild, musky scent that made something ancient in her brain scream at her to run. But she did not run. She stayed where she was, kneeling beside the injured cub, her hands still working to save a life that might already be beyond saving. The cub seemed to sense that something was happening. It lifted its small head and made a sound. Not a growl this time, but something softer, almost like a question. Alara wondered if it was calling for its mother, not understanding that its mother would never answer again. "It is okay," Alara whispered to the cub, even though she knew it probably could not understand her words. "I am here. You are not alone. I am going to help you." The cub's amber eyes found hers, and for a moment something passed between them, some understanding that went beyond language or species. This small creature was afraid and in pain, and Alara was the only source of warmth and comfort it had. Heavy footsteps crunched in the snow outside, and a shadow fell across the cave entrance. Alara looked up and felt her blood turn to ice. A Vorak warrior stood there, massive and terrifying, with silver-black fur and eyes that glowed like yellow fire in the dim light. He was at least 7 feet tall, with shoulders as wide as a doorway and claws that extended from his fingers like curved knives. This was a creature built for killing, and right now Those burning eyes were fixed on Elara. Behind him, more shapes appeared, more warriors, until there were 12 of them blocking the cave entrance. They did not enter, not yet, but their growls filled the cave with a sound like thunder rolling through mountains. The largest one, the one in front, took a step forward and spoke in a voice that was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "Human," he snarled, and the word was filled with hatred and disgust. "You dare to enter our sacred ground. You dare to touch our young." Elara recognized him from the briefing she had read about the Vorok. This was General Corveth, called Blackfang by his enemies and his allies alike. He was the most feared alpha in the entire Vorok nation, famous for his hatred of humans and his brutal efficiency in killing them. Stories said he had personally torn apart over 100 human soldiers during the border wars. She was going to die here. She knew that with absolute certainty. There was no escape, no negotiation, no mercy to be expected from these creatures. But knowing she was going to die did not change what she had to do. "The cub is badly hurt," Elara said, keeping her voice as calm as she could manage. "Internal bleeding, broken bones, hypothermia. I am a doctor. I am trying to help." Corveth's growl grew louder, and he took another step forward. His warriors shifted behind him, ready to attack at his command. "You lie," Corveth said. "Humans do not help. Humans only take and destroy. Step away from the cub, human, and I will make your death quick. Resist, and you will suffer for hours before I let you die." Elara looked down at the cub, at its small body struggling to breathe, at its eyes that were growing dimmer with each passing moment. She thought about standing up and stepping away, about accepting her death and hoping it would be as quick as Corveth promised. But then the cub whimpered again, and it pressed its small body against her knee, seeking warmth, seeking comfort, seeking the presence of another living creature in its final moments. And Elara knew she could not abandon it. "No," she said, and her voice was surprisingly steady. "I will not step away. This child is dying, and I will not let it die alone." The warriors behind Corveth shifted and snarled, shocked that a human would dare to defy their general. Corveth himself seemed frozen for a moment, as if he could not believe what he was hearing. "You choose death for a creature that is not even your own kind," Corveth said. And there was something in his voice that might have been confusion. "Why would you do this, human? What trick are you playing?" "There is no trick," Elara said, and she turned back to the cub and continued her work, injecting another dose of pain medication into its small body. "I am a doctor. I help those who are hurt. That is what I do. That is who I am. I do not care what species they belong to." She could feel Corveth's eyes burning into her back, and she could hear the growls of the other warriors growing louder, more impatient. They wanted blood. They wanted to tear her apart, and only Corveth's command was holding them back. But Corveth did not give that command, not yet. Instead, he watched as this small human female worked over the dying cub, her hands gentle and sure, her voice soft and soothing. "Your mother was very brave," Elara was saying to the cub, even though it could not understand her. "She fought to protect you. She loved you very much. I am sorry. I could not save her. But I am going to do everything I can to save you." The cub made a small sound, and its tail moved weakly, the tiniest wad. It was responding to her voice, to her touch, to the kindness that it could somehow sense, even though they were different species from different worlds. Corveth took another step closer, and now he could see the cub more clearly. He could see the bandages Elara had wrapped around its wounds, the medicine she had injected, the careful way she was monitoring its breathing. This human was truly trying to save it, not as a trick, not for any reward, but simply because it needed saving. He could also see what Elara already knew. The cub was dying. Its injuries were too severe. Its small body was giving up. No amount of medicine or care was going to change that truth. "You know it will die," Corvette said, and his voice was quieter now, though still rough with suspicion. "You know you cannot save it, and yet you stay. You know we will kill you, and yet you stay. Explain this to me, human." Alara did not look up from the cub. She was adjusting the heating pad she had placed under its body, trying to warm it, trying to give it comfort. "When I was young," she said, "my grandmother was dying. The doctors could not save her. Everyone knew she was going to die, but I stayed with her. I held her hand. I talked to her. I was there when she took her last breath. She did not die alone, and that mattered. It mattered to her, and it mattered to me." She finally looked up at Corvette, and there were tears in her eyes. "No one should die alone," she said. "No one should die afraid and cold and lonely. I cannot save this cub. I know that now. But I can make sure it knows that someone cares, that someone is here, that it is not alone in the dark." Corvette stared at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his yellow eyes, something that his warriors had never seen before. Doubt, confusion, and perhaps the smallest spark of something that might have been respect. The cub whimpered again, and its small body began to shake. The end was coming, faster now, and Alara gathered the tiny creature into her arms and held it close to her chest. "I am here," she whispered. "I am here, little one. You are safe. You are loved. You are not alone." The warriors watched in stunned silence as this human, this enemy, this creature they had been taught to hate and fear, cradled their dying young and wept for it. The cave was silent, except for the sound of the cub's labored breathing, and Alara held the small creature against her chest, feeling its heart flutter like a trapped bird beneath her hands. Corvette and his warriors stood frozen at the entrance, watching something they could not explain, something that went against everything they had ever believed about humans. This female was going to die. She knew she was going to die, and yet she stayed to comfort their young. The cub's breathing grew weaker, more shallow, and Alara could feel its small body growing cold, despite the heating pad and her own body warmth. The internal bleeding was too severe, and its tiny heart was struggling to keep pumping. "Stay with me," Alara whispered, stroking the cub's soft silver fur. "Stay with me, little one. I am right here." The cub opened its eyes, those huge amber eyes that seemed too big for its small face, and it looked up at Alara with an expression that broke her heart. There was pain in those eyes, and fear, but there was also something else, something like gratitude, something like trust. This tiny creature, born of a species that hated humans, was trusting Alara with its final moments. One of the warriors behind Corvette spoke up, his voice rough with anger. "General, why do we wait? This human has violated sacred ground. She has touched our young. She must die." Several other warriors growled in agreement, but Corvette raised one massive clawed hand, and they fell silent. His eyes never left Alara and the cub. "Silence," he commanded. "We will wait." The warrior who had spoken looked confused and angry, but he did not dare to question his general again. Corvette's word was law, and to challenge him was to invite death. Alara did not notice the exchange. All her attention was focused on the small life she held in her arms. The cub's breathing had become irregular, stopping and starting, and she knew that the end was very close now. She had seen death many times in her years as a doctor. She had held the hands of humans as they passed. She had comforted alien patients of a dozen different species. She had learned that death was not an enemy to be fought, but a passage to be honored. And she had learned that the greatest gift you could give to someone who was dying was the simple knowledge that they were not alone. The cub began to shake, its small body seized by tremors it could not control. Alara held it tighter, pressing it against her chest, so it could feel her heartbeat, so it could feel the warmth of another living creature surrounding it. "I have got you," she whispered. "I am not going to let go. I am right here. You are safe." The tremors grew worse, and the cub made a sound that was half whimper and half cry. It was afraid, so afraid, and Alara felt tears streaming down her face as she tried to give it whatever comfort she could. She began to hum, a soft melody that her grandmother used to sing to her when she was small and scared. She did not know if the cub could hear it, did not know if it meant anything to a creature from another world, but she hummed anyway, hoping that somehow the love behind the music would translate. Corveth took a step forward, then another. He moved slowly, not like a predator approaching prey, but like someone approaching something sacred, something holy. He stopped just a few feet away from Alara and the cub, close enough to see the tears on the human's face, close enough to hear the soft melody she was humming. "What is that sound?" he asked, and his voice was quiet, almost gentle. "A song," Alara said without looking up. "A lullaby. My grandmother used to sing it to me when I was frightened. It always made me feel safe." Corveth said nothing, but he did not move away. He watched as this human sang to their dying cub, as she held it and rocked it gently, as she gave it the kind of comfort that he had not known humans were capable of giving. The cub's tremors began to slow, and its breathing became shallow and weak. It was slipping away now, fading like a candle flame running out of wax. There was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Ilara looked down at the small face nestled against her chest, at the amber eyes that were growing dim, and she felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. She had failed. She could not save it. All her training and skill and medicine had not been enough. But she could do one more thing, one final act of love and kindness. She leaned down and pressed her lips gently to the cub's forehead, the way her mother used to kiss her goodnight, the way humans had been showing love to their children for thousands of years. She let her lips linger there for a moment, warm and soft against the cool silver fur. "You are not alone," she whispered against the cub's forehead. "You are loved. You are so loved, and wherever you are going, that love goes with you. Be at peace, little one, be at peace." The cub let out one final breath, a soft sigh that sounded almost like contentment, and then it was still. Its amber eyes closed gently, peacefully, and its small body relaxed in Alara's arms. It was gone. Alara held the small body close and let herself cry, great heaving sobs that shook her entire frame. She had known this creature for less than an hour, had not even known its name, but she grieved for it as if it had been her own child. She cried for the cub who would never grow up, who would never run through the snow with its siblings, who would never know the joy of being part of a pack. She cried for the mother who had died trying to protect it, whose body lay cold and still just a few feet away. She cried for all the senseless death in the universe, for all the children who died before their time, for all the love that was never given, because beings were too afraid or too proud or too hateful. She cried, and she did not care that 12 Vorok warriors were watching her, did not care that she was moments away from her own death. Corveth stared at the scene before him, and something inside him cracked. Something hard and cold that had been building for years, a wall of hatred that he had constructed against the humans who had killed so many of his kind. He had been taught that humans were monsters, creatures without honor or compassion, beings who cared only for themselves and would destroy anything in their path. He had believed this with all his heart, had killed humans without mercy or regret, had told himself that they deserved to die because they were not truly alive, not in the way that mattered. End of paragraph. But the creature before him now was not a monster. She was small and fragile and weeping, holding their dead cub as if it were her own. grieving for it in a way that Corveth recognized, because it was the same way his own people grieved. She had kissed it. She had given it the death blessing of her kind. She had honored it in death, as if it were worthy of honor. And it was worthy. Every cub was worthy, but Corveth had never expected a human to see that. His claws, which had been extended and ready to kill, slowly retracted. His warriors noticed and shifted uneasily, confused by their general's behavior. "General," one of them said quietly, "what are your orders?" Corveth did not answer immediately. He was still staring at Alara, at this human who had defied everything he thought he knew. "My orders," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion he did not fully understand, "are to stand down. We will not harm this human, not today." The warriors exchanged shocked glances, but none of them dared to argue. They lowered their weapons and stepped back, and the cave fell into a deep and heavy silence. Alara finally looked up, her face wet with tears, and found Corveth watching her with an expression she could not read. "I am sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I am so sorry I could not save her." Corveth said nothing for a long moment, and then he did something that no Vorak had ever done in the presence of a human. 3 days had passed since the night in the cave, and Alara stood in the great tribal hall of the Vorak, surrounded by hundreds of the massive wolf-like creatures who had every reason to want her dead. The hall was carved from black stone, with pillars that rose toward a ceiling lost in shadow, and torches that cast dancing orange light across the faces of the gathered pack. It was ancient and sacred, a place where the Vorak had held their councils for thousands of years. Alara's hands were bound in front of her, and 2 warriors stood on either side of her. But she held her head high and met the eyes of those who stared at her with hatred and curiosity. At the far end of the hall, on a throne carved from the bones of ancient beasts, sat the High Alpha of the Vorak nation. He was old, older than any Vorak Alara had ever seen, with fur that had turned from silver to white, and eyes that burned with a wisdom earned over centuries. His name was Vorath, the Eternal, and his word was the final law of his people. "Human," Vorath spoke, and his voice echoed through the hall like thunder. "You stand accused of trespassing on sacred ground, of entering our nursery lands without permission, of violating the laws that have protected our young for generations. The punishment for these crimes is death. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Alara took a deep breath before answering. "High Alpha, my ship crashed on your moon. I did not come here by choice, and I did not know where I was when I sought shelter from the storm. I found a cave, and in that cave I found a dying cub. I am a doctor, a healer, and I could not walk away from a child in pain." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some angry and some confused. A female Vorak near the front snarled and stepped forward. "She lies," the female cried. "Humans always lie. They are deceivers and destroyers, and we should kill her now and be done with it." Many voices rose in agreement, and Alara felt her hopes slipping away. She had known from the beginning that her chances were slim, but hearing the hatred in those voices made it real in a way she had not been prepared for. Vorath raised one ancient hand, and the hall fell silent immediately. "There is one who wishes to speak for this human," Vorath said. "One whose word carries great weight among our people. General Corveth Blackfang, step forward and give your testimony." The crowd parted, and Corveth walked through them toward the throne. He was even more impressive here than he had been in the cave, his black and silver fur gleaming in the torchlight, his presence commanding the attention of every creature in the hall. He stopped before the throne and bowed his head to Vorath, then turned to face the assembled pack. "I was there," Corveth began, his deep voice carrying easily through the vast space. I was the first to enter the cave. I was the first to see what this human was doing. What I witnessed changed everything I thought I knew. The crowd was utterly silent, every eye fixed on their greatest warrior. When I entered that cave, I expected to find a murderer, Corveth continued. I expected to find a human who had killed our female and was preparing to kill our cub. I was ready to tear her apart with my own claws, ready to make her suffer for what I believed she had done. He paused, and his yellow eyes found Ilara in the crowd. But that is not what I found. I found a human kneeling in the cold, working desperately to save a life. I found a doctor who had given her warmth and her medicine and her skill to a creature that was not her own kind. I found a female who knew she was going to die, but refused to leave a child alone in its final moments. More murmurs, but these were different, softer, tinged with something that might have been doubt. I watched her, Corveth said, and his voice grew quieter, more intense. I watched her hold our cub as it died. I watched her stroke its fur and speak soft words to it. I watched her cry for it, grieve for it, as if it were her own child. The female who had spoken earlier stepped forward again. These could be tricks, she said. Humans are known for their deception. She could have been acting to save her own life. Corveth turned to face her, and his gaze was so intense that she took a step back. She knew she was going to die, he said. We had her surrounded. There was no escape, and she knew it. If she had stepped away from the cub, if she had abandoned it, I might have given her a quick death. But she refused. She looked me in the eyes and told me she would not let a child die alone, even if it meant dying herself. He turned back to the crowd, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. And when the end came, when our cub was taking its final breaths, this human did something I have never seen before. She leaned down and pressed her lips to the cub's forehead, and she whispered words of love and comfort. The hall was so silent that Ilara could hear her own heartbeat. Among her people, Corveth said, this is called a kiss. It is a gesture of love, of protection, of blessing. It is what human mothers give to their children. It is what humans give to those they cherish. And this human gave it to our cub. He paused, letting his words sink in. She gave our cub the death blessing of her people. She honored it in death, as if it were her own child. She wept for it, genuinely and deeply, and I saw in her eyes a grief that cannot be faked. Corveth turned to face the High Alpha, and he lowered his head in a gesture of respect. High Alpha, I have killed many humans in my life. I have believed them to be creatures without honor, without compassion, without souls, but I was wrong. I watched this human give our cub the most precious gift anyone can give to the dying, the gift of not being alone. He raised his head and spoke his final words with absolute conviction. Among our people, we have stories of the old ones, beings who walked the stars long ago and who understood the bond of pack, the weight of loss, the sacred duty to protect the young. We believed these beings were gone forever. But I looked into this human's eyes as she held our dying cub, and I saw the soul of an old one looking back at me. The hall erupted in shocked whispers, and Ilara stared at Corveth in disbelief. She did not know what the old ones were, but from the reaction of the crowd, she understood that he had said something profound, something that changed everything. Vorath the Eternal rose slowly from his throne, and the whispers died instantly. The ancient Alpha descended from his seat and walked toward Ilara, his white fur seeming to glow in the torchlight. He stopped in front of her, towering over her small human form, and his ancient eyes studied her face for a long moment. Human, he said finally, I have lived for 300 years. I have seen wars and plagues and disasters. I have watched species rise and fall. I have learned that the universe is vast and strange and full of surprises. He leaned closer, and his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow still carried through the entire hall. "But I have never heard General Corveth Blackfang speak in defense of a human. I have never seen him bow his head to anyone but me. And I have never known him to call any creature an old one." Vorak straightened up and turned to face his people. "This human will not die today," he announced, and his voice left no room for argument. "She came to our world by accident, and she honored our young in its death. Whatever crimes she may have committed, they are forgiven." And then the High Alpha of the Vorak nation did something that had not been done in over 1,000 years. He lowered his head to Alara in the sacred bow of kinship, recognizing her not as an enemy or a prisoner, but as a member of the pack. The hall gasped as one, and Alara felt tears streaming down her face again, not from grief this time, but from relief and wonder. She had come to this world expecting to die, and instead she had found something she never expected: acceptance, understanding, and the beginning of something that might one day become peace. 1 year had passed since the night in the cave, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The story of what happened on Kethvaros had spread like wildfire across 100 worlds, traveling from ship to ship and station to station, until it seemed like everyone in the known universe had heard some version of it. They called it the Miracle of Kethvaros, or the Night of the Kiss, or simply the Tale of the Human Doctor. Some versions were exaggerated, claiming that Alara had fought off 12 warriors with her bare hands before healing the cub. Others were simplified, reducing the whole event to a single sentence. But all of them contained the same core truth: a human had risked her life to comfort a dying alien child, and the most feared warriors in the galaxy had bowed to her. Dr. Alara Vance had become famous in a way she had never wanted or expected. Her face was on news broadcasts, her name was discussed in government chambers, and her inbox was constantly full of messages from people who wanted to thank her or interview her, or simply tell her that her story had given them hope. But more important than the fame was what came after. On frontier worlds, where humans and Vorak had been enemies for generations, something began to shift. Soldiers who had spent their whole lives fighting each other started to talk instead. Trade agreements were signed, where before there had only been bloodshed, and for the first time in memory, human children and Vorak cubs could look at each other without fear. It was not perfect, and it was not fast. Hatred that had built up over decades could not disappear overnight. But it was a beginning, and beginnings were precious things. Alara had been given a new role, one that she had never trained for, but had somehow become perfectly suited to: Ambassador of First Contact, the official human representative to the Vorak nation. She was the first human ever granted free passage through Vorak space, the first human ever welcomed in their sacred halls, the first human ever called friend by their greatest warriors. And now, 1 year after that frozen night, she was returning to Kethvaros. Her shuttle descended through the atmosphere of the moon, and Alara watched through the window as the white landscape spread out below her. It looked different in daylight, beautiful rather than terrifying, with rolling hills of snow and forests of ice-covered trees that sparkled like diamonds in the pale sunlight. The shuttle landed at a small platform near the sacred nursery grounds, and when Alara stepped out into the cold air, she found Corveth waiting for her. The great general looked the same as he had a year ago, massive and powerful, with his silver-black fur rippling in the wind. But there was something different in his eyes now, something warmer. "Dr. Vance," he said, and his rough voice held a hint of what might have been pleasure. "Welcome back to Kethvaros." "General Corveth," Alara replied, bowing her head in the Vorak gesture of respect. "Thank you for inviting me." They walked together through the snow, following a path that led toward a small hill in the distance. Corveth matched his pace to Alara's shorter stride, a courtesy that would have been unthinkable a year ago. "I was surprised when I received your message," Alara said as they walked. "I did not expect to return here so soon." Corveth nodded, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Today is the anniversary of her death," he said. "Among my people, we hold a memorial on this day for the young who have passed. It seemed right that you should be here." Alara felt a lump form in her throat. She had thought about the cub often over the past year, wondering what her name had been, wondering what kind of creature she might have grown into. "What was she called?" Alara asked, realizing she had never known. "Sileth," Corveth replied, and his voice was soft in a way that surprised her. "It means first snow in our language. She was born on the first snow of the season, and her fur was the purest silver anyone had ever seen. Her mother named her just moments after her birth." Sileth. Alara repeated the name in her mind, giving a name to the small face she had carried in her memory for a year. They reached the top of the hill, and Alara saw what waited there. A small monument of white stone, carved in the shape of a sleeping cub, stood in a clearing surrounded by ice flowers. It was simple and beautiful, and the sight of it made Alara's eyes fill with tears. Around the monument stood a circle of Vorak, 12 warriors in ceremonial dress, standing in silent vigil. Alara recognized them as the same warriors who had been in the cave that night, the same ones who had watched her hold Sileth as she died. They bowed their heads as Alara approached, and she bowed in return. Corveth led her to the monument and stood beside her, looking down at the carved stone face of the cub. "Among my people," he said, "we believe that the dead watch over those who honored them in life. Sileth watches you now, Dr. Vance, and she is grateful for what you gave her." He reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a small object. It was a pendant on a silver chain, and in the center of the pendant was a lock of silver fur encased in clear crystal. "This is for you," Corveth said, placing the pendant in Alara's hands. "It is a lock of Sileth's fur, preserved so that you may carry her with you always. Among our people, this is the highest honor we can give to one who is not of our blood." Alara held the pendant carefully, looking at the tiny tuft of silver fur that seemed to glow in the pale light. She remembered how soft that fur had felt against her cheek, how warm the small body had been in her arms. "Thank you," she whispered. "I will treasure this always." She put the chain around her neck, and the pendant rested against her heart. They stood in silence for a moment, human and Vorak, remembering a cub who had lived only a few short weeks, but whose death had changed the galaxy. "Can I ask you something?" Alara said finally. "You may ask anything," Corveth replied. "That night, when you first found me in the cave, you wanted to kill me. I could see it in your eyes. But you did not. Even before Sileth died, you held back. Why?" Corveth was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I have asked myself that question many times," he admitted, "and I think the answer is that I saw something in you that I did not expect. I saw a creature who was willing to die for a child that was not her own, who chose death rather than abandonment. I had never seen a human do anything like that, and it made me hesitate." He turned to look at Alara, and his yellow eyes were intense. "Your people are strange, Dr. Vance. You are weak and small and fragile, and yet you love with a ferocity that puts our greatest warriors to shame. You do not love because it is wise, or because it will benefit you. You love because you cannot stop yourselves, because it is in your nature, because to do otherwise would make you less than what you are." He shook his head slowly. "We thought this made you weak. We thought your compassion was a flaw to be exploited. But we were fools. Your compassion is your greatest strength, and the galaxy is only beginning to understand how powerful that strength can be." Alara looked out at the frozen landscape, at the world that had nearly been her grave, and had instead become a place of hope. "I did not think about any of that," she admitted. "I just saw a child who was hurt and alone, and I could not walk away. That is all." Corvette made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That, Dr. Vance, is exactly what makes your kind so remarkable. You do not calculate the cost of kindness. You simply give it, and in giving it, you change worlds." Behind them, the 12 warriors stood in formation, not as guards, but as an honor guard, watching over the human who had become part of their story. The galaxy had always known what humans could destroy. Their wars and weapons and willingness to fight had made them famous and feared across the stars. But now, slowly, the galaxy was learning something new. It was learning what humans could heal. And that, perhaps, was the most terrifying and wonderful thing of all.